Welcome back to another episode of Proof Theology. My name is Chase Davis, and I'm your host. It's good to be with you here today. We're going to talk with Michael Cassidy. You may remember his story back last year. He slew a demon statue in the Iowa State Capitol. And so we're going to have a fun time talking about why he did that and the legal ramifications that followed. We're going to be joined by his lawyer and have a great conversation about all the things he's going through right now. We get into a variety of matters, both legally and historically as Christians, and both also with the kind of American system of religious freedom. We explore that topic. So it's going to be a fun conversation with those two today. Before we get into that, I wanted to remind you about the Patreon. If you go over to the Patreon, you can interact with me on any topic I discuss on the show. You can also suggest topics that you think I should cover. Sign up on the Patreon today, $5 or $15 a month. Get you swag, a sticker, or a mug, depending on what you sign up at. And you also get early access to almost every, I'm going to say 99% of my episodes are early access, unless it's a day like today where I'm recording and releasing on the same day and trying to get content out there for the masses. So this is a program that is brought to you by patrons, you people who support me on Patreon. That is the biggest way you can help me and support me and help the show keep going. So thank you for those of you who have signed up. I have a lot of fun doing the show. It's one of my favorite things to do. Right now, it's a glorified hobby that covers cost most months. And I would just love your partnership. If I can make it more regular, that would be the goal for me, is to have more conversations, more episodes get released, just because I enjoy doing this so much and it's really fun. So head over to the Patreon link in the show notes, sign up today to support me, support Proof Theology, and let's get into the conversation with Michael Cassidy. Welcome back to another episode of Proof Theology. My name is Chase Davis, and I'm your host. It's great to be with you here today. Today on the show, we've got two great gentlemen, Michael Cassidy and Davis Younts. I've had Davis on before, and we've talked about various legal matters. He's a lawyer. And Michael, you may not know, but you're going to get to know in this episode. He did a heroic action in my mind, but we're going to discuss all the both kind of biblical realities about kind of some of the things he's done and what he's enduring and what he's experiencing, and also the legal realities from Davis here as well. So why don't you guys, Davis, why don't you go first? Kind of introduce yourself to people. Maybe they didn't listen to the last episode. They should, but introduce yourself to people so they can get to know you better.
Hey, brother, thanks for the chance to be on again. Love what you're doing with the show. So, yeah, for those who don't know me, I'm a retired military officer. I served in the Air Force for 20 years, 11 on active duty, and then 9 in the reserves. I'm a Christian, homeschool dad, and I have my own law firm. I've had my own law firm since 2019. We focus on representing military members. We do a lot of work for religious freedom, and we're expanding into helping Christian small businesses. So that's what I have the opportunity to do. In addition to all that, which is relevant to Michael's case, I also work with a nonprofit called Stand With Warriors. You can check them out at standwithwarriors.org, but they're focused on helping federal law enforcement and military members take a strong stance like Michael did in his case.
Excellent. All right, Michael, what about you? Give people some information, some background info. What you're a Christian man. Just kind of tell your story a little bit before we get into the events of December 2023.
Thanks, Chase. Yeah, I live in Mississippi. My background is that I've been in the Navy my entire adult life for about 12 years, active duty, flying jets, including the F-18 off aircraft carriers. Then the Navy sent me to Mississippi to be an instructor pilot, and I've been doing that for the past few years in the reserves. And yet grew up in a Christian household and still a Christian. That's definitely, central to the story of why I decided to go up to Iowa and do what I did.
That's great. All right. And I have to ask, if you flew F-18s in the Navy off aircraft carriers,
yeah.
Are you Maverick from Top Gun? Were you in Top Gun? Is there such a thing as Top Gun? Tell me about that.
I am not Maverick. But yes, there is such a thing as Top Gun. Is flying jets in the Navy as cool as they make it look? In Top Gun, the answer is yes. And in fact, I would say cooler. But it's been a great profession for a long time.
That's excellent, man. Well, thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Let's get into what happened in December 2023. The last 4 years have been wild. There's been all sorts of statues put up everywhere. I remember in 2020, I think it was, there was like a big statue in Minneapolis to like George Floyd, and it was made of gold. And I was like, yeah, this is not good. Anyway, so what we saw in Iowa was there was, I would call it a satanic statue. I don't know the legal terminology or what you guys considered it. Put up in the state capitol. This was supposed to be kind of a freedom of expression or something like that. Michael, you went up there and, chopped it down. So tell me kind of some of the background of like what you saw and why you chose to do that.
Sure. And just to follow up on me talking about the Navy, I'm not, these are my own views. I'm not representing the Department of Defense. So what happened with Iowa is that, this group called the Satanic Temple, which I didn't know anything about until after I chopped off the statue's head of the devil. They're a group of atheists. Really, they're anti-Christians more than anything, and they're not a religious group by any normal definition of religion. The only connection with religion that they have is that they are anti-Christian, and so they do these various troll things. They try to use freedom of religion excuses to do evil. They may not be evil in their eyes, but it's, evil in God's eyes, and certainly putting a positive representation of Satan in a government building next to a nativity scene, or really next to anywhere. That's evil. And so this satanic icon, it went viral on social media after it had been up in the Capitol for about a week. Unfortunately, there was it went viral because there was a pastor and a state representative in Iowa who he wasn't saying that it's a good thing that there's a devil statue, but he was saying essentially kind of like the David French crowd, that it's a blessing of liberty to have drag shows in elementary schools, or it's a blessing of liberty to have demonic statues in state capitals. And I disagreed. And so I saw there's a big pressure campaign over the next few days to get it taken down. And I thought that was going to, somebody was going to say, okay, Mr. Unnamed bureaucrat, you slipped one by us, but we're not going to let you get away with it now that everybody knows about it. So they're going to take it down. Well, that didn't happen. It stayed up a few days after this went viral. And so I bought a plane ticket on a Wednesday. I told my boss that, hey, I'm going to need a personal day off tomorrow. And I flew up to Iowa that evening and went to the state capitol the next morning. And I had no intention of, doing anything. If there were Satanists there, like I wasn't going to, start punching them in the face or anything like that. But I wanted to go there and see it for myself. And there was no security there. And so I viewed that as providential. And then I destroyed it. And it was made out of pool noodles and cheap fabric. And it gave way quite easily. And then which I think is, a metaphor for, resisting the devil and he'll flee from you. And that really, you just need to have some boldness and faith in Jesus. And yes, and the devil will flee from you. And then I turned myself in, and they held me for a little bit there at the Capitol. They said that they were going to take me to jail. They handcuffed me for a little bit, but I didn't get, really officially arrested. There's no cool Trump-esque mugshot floating around the internet anywhere. They just let me go and charged me with a misdemeanor for vandalism, which, that's what I did. Honestly, that's what I did. And then about a month and a half later, the district attorney in Iowa, who is a leftist, funded by George Soros, she upped the charge from, a vandalism misdemeanor charge to a felony hate crime.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so that had some, after effects to it with the Navy, but with the state of Iowa, they were essentially trying to bully me into pleading guilty to a hate crime, but at like the lowest vandalism, like $50 vandalism charge. But no, you've got to plead guilty to a hate crime. And I said no. Like the only thing that was hateful was the Satanic temple putting up a statue of the devil. That I've got no animosity towards any of I feel sorry for the people in the Satanic temple. I don't hate them. And once we got about a week from trial, thankfully, because we had the resources that people donated, I think we had like $150,000 or something like that, including from Ron DeSantis, from Turning Point USA, and hundreds of people around the country, that we had a robust defense with expert witnesses that could testify to who the Satanic temple really was, the value of the devil statue, all sorts of things. And they saw the state saw that we were going to crush them should the trial happen. And they said, you know what, we back off. It's back down to the misdemeanor vandalism that we originally charged. Pay a fine, go on probation, and this will go off your record in, 6 to 24 months, something like that. And so that's what we did.
Okay, that's great. I've got a lot of questions about kind of how this went down, because part of me as a Christian man is very inspired by your actions. I think that any Christian man who sees this should be inspired. If you're not inspired, even a little bit in your primitive brain, perhaps, that there might be something wrong with you. This is a very bold, courageous thing. I would like to kind of get into kind of some of the story as far as like, is this something you've done before? Like, are you down in Mississippi just going around, knocking down any satanic figures you see? Like, what's some of the background there that led you to decide, I'm going to take a day off, I'm going to fly up to Iowa? What was going on there?
For legal reasons, no comment. No, I'm just kidding. It's kind of funny. In the past several months, there've been a handful of, demonic statues that get placed up in various places, and I'll find myself getting tagged on social media saying, "Hey, Michael Cassidy, we got a job for you, brother." But no, there's been no. I don't have a history of tearing down any demonic statues. I think I've got a history of, standing up for what I think is correct, and I certainly was pretty vocal against the Navy with their COVID mandate shot, for example, or against the DEI mandates that they've had that have weakened our military. I ran for political office a couple of years ago, and that was part of the platform. And the Navy was not a fan of that, believe it or not. But it's the right thing. I care more about what's right for our country. I care more about what's right for our society. And if that means I've got to take some knocks along the way, then I take those knocks along the way. And in specific regards to why did I go up to Iowa? And part of what I had been, I think what was in the forefront of my brain is that I'd been reading a book on the 800 or 1,000 years of conflict between Islam and Christianity. And it from a guy named Ibrahim, I think. And it gave all these examples of these Christian men who were willing to sell everything and go and defend Christians being attacked in the Holy Land. And so that thought of men being willing to put it all on the line for what they believed was correct, without going into various theological arguments about the Crusades, but just very narrowly in that mindset. And I was reading that just when I saw the story of Iowa went viral, and I thought, what's my excuse? What's my excuse to not risk something when we see that plenty of other people who have the responsibility to take this down, whether from in the Iowa government at all levels, and nobody's done that. And I felt moved to go do it myself.
Yeah. So when you flew up to Iowa, And I have no idea about Davis can like say, we're not going to ask that question. I'm not trying to, but I'm curious, like, does it have any bearing on like when you flew up to Iowa, was the intention to tear it down or was the intention to just go see it and be there to be like, is anybody going to do anything about this? Like, what was kind of like going on in your head? You buy the plane ticket, you ask the day off, you go up to Iowa. Mm-hmm. Were you like thinking, I'm just going to go over there and knock it over? What were you kind of thinking there?
I certainly thought that I might. I didn't buy a plane ticket and just say, oh, I'm going to just go to Des Moines for the day, just in sightsee. And oh, wow, there's this devil statue here. No, like I went there because of the statue. Now, what exactly I was going to do, I didn't have a plan. I did not know what was going to happen when I got there. I certainly, again, considered taking it down, but I didn't know if there was going to be security, and I wasn't going to do anything violent. But when I got there, really two things happened. One, in addition, I've been praying about it the previous 24, 48 hours, that one, there was no security there, and two, actually seeing it in person. It really just emphasized the evil nature of it more so than just seeing it on your phone. Right. I mean, this is a statue of the demonic representation in the state capital of one of our states. And and I just felt overwhelmed by, this is evil. And no, I'm not just going to think about taking it down. I'm going to do it. Right. And so it wasn't until actually right after I first saw it, and then I pondered and prayed on it for a minute or two, and then I said, yes, I'm doing this. And I did it.
All right. Yeah, and we also have biblical precedent. I mean, like, there's all sorts of stories in the Old Testament. We can even go to the New Testament about Jesus flipping over tables and that kind of thing. Obviously, I'm a pastor. I know these are different circumstances and that kind of thing. We can talk about that another time and pull that thread if we want. But I think King Josiah is a great example of someone who tore down satanic statues and the false gods and all that kind of stuff. So even if we wanted to ignore the Crusades, which I've had Raymond on the podcast before and talked about that. But even if we didn't want to touch that topic, we have biblical precedent for why Christians would act in this way. Davis, kind of walk me through some of the. Let's do this first. When did you enter the picture here? Were you already talking to Michael, like, okay, here's how we're going to do this, or did you come in later? Like, what's going on there? How did you enter this picture?
No, so this is a great story. So I will say Michael and I knew each other. Michael had been a client because he ran for political office. He expressed some Christian beliefs. I had helped him out. We had gone through a little bit of an investigation with the Navy. Everything turned out fine. And I don't think we'd spoken for almost a year, maybe 8 months. And I just finished a case, an Air Force case in Michigan. So I was traveling in Michigan, and I get a text from Michael and said, hey, if I did this, would you represent me? And then I responded, I said, we need to talk. And he goes, well, because I already did it. right? And that's a paraphrase of the text. But Michael contacted me after it was already done, after he'd already turned himself in. And so that's when I got involved. So this was not pre-planned in any way. It's funny. One of the things that the Navy has accused him of is that this was somehow pre-planned or pre-staged. It wasn't. What they're shocked by is the fact that, we're competent and we have a community of people to support us. So immediately, once this happened, I knew we were going to need a lot of resources in order to fight back. Because I knew that, the spirit of the age was going to come at Michael hard. So absolutely, I talked to the guys from the Republic Sentinel and got those folks involved early. So they were able to leak the story so the story could be told in the right way. But that all happened after the fact. But yeah, that's a big question that's come up.
It's an important one. I think one thing that I wanted to talk about, because I sympathize with people who want to defend America and maybe see this action of tearing down the statue as either un-American or violating kind of free speech or something like that. I hear those concerns. It's not that, I think at a gut level, I'm like, way to go, Michael. On another level, I'm like, also, I understand that we live in a country with laws. You obviously got a misdemeanor. You're willing to accept that, which is right in line with Protestant political theology and civil disobedience and that kind of thing. But talk to me, Davis, about some of how we should think about freedom of expression and this kind of thing in this particular situation.
Yeah, so there's so much there, but I think there's a couple of critical issues. First, you have to understand the heart and intent behind these people. And Michael didn't know this beforehand, but the Satanic Temple is an organization that solely exists. I believe this very strongly, and they may come after me for saying this, but I believe they exist simply because they hate Christians and hate Christianity. Their sole existence is to mock and troll Christians. So if you look up the Satanic history, the Satanic Temple, and you look at their history, this is what they do. So they start after school Satan clubs. They do all these things. So what they intentionally did in Iowa is they try to use a loophole for artistic displays in the Capitol, but they did this intentionally so it would be set up as near as possible to a nativity scene, so that anyone who went to the state capitol to, show reverence to the nativity scene, to understand the true meaning of Christmas from a Christian perspective, they would be confronted with this statue to Bahamut, this idol of Bahamut, a statue to Satan that is specifically designed to be as offensive and repulsive as possible to Christians. And so it brings up a lot of interesting issues. I mean, would we tolerate an artistic display to revering Hitler in the Iowa State Capitol, during when there was a Holocaust remembrance display set up? I don't think we would, right?
Right.
I think we would understand, okay, this is provocative speech and there are issues here. So I think, we have to look at these issues and we have to say evil is evil. So absolutely, because of our Christian founding, because of the biblical beliefs of our founders, we've had religious freedom in our nation. At the same time, we had anti-blasphemy laws. And I think every nation in history has had anti-blasphemy laws. The question has always been, what are those anti-blasphemy laws going to say? Are they going to prevent people from blaspheming Christ, or are they going to prevent people from blaspheming the latest trans ideology or something else? So there are a ton of issues we could talk about for a long time. As a fundamental issue, Michael engaged in civil disobedience. I think he did it in a God-honoring way, and he did it prepared to face the consequences. I mean, he peacefully turned himself in, cleaned up the mess he made. I mean, that's the way we do it. That's the proper way to do it. And then we have to advocate for change in our society so that biblical law and biblical morality will be reflected in these decisions, and we won't be in this situation again.
Yeah. So talk to me a bit about the kind of legal, I'm assuming with the case, it's kind of like you have to look at precedent. You have to look at other cases. I think I'm not a lawyer, but the way you talked about anti-blasphemy laws, like the hate speech laws in America seem to be kind of almost a one-to-one correlation for new blasphemy laws, like what you're allowed to not say, what you're allowed to not speak or do. What's kind of the precedence of this? Has someone else done this in American history? Have they been prosecuted? What other cases are you relying on to kind of like make the strongest case you can for Michael?
So, there was no precedent for charging him with a hate crime for something like this. So, that was one of the issues that we dealt with in this, is there was no precedent. So it was going to be a partially fact question for the jury to decide, because the judge didn't want to weigh in on it too much either. But there isn't a lot of precedent when we start talking about these things, because we haven't been in a situation where our nation would allow a statue of Satan to be in the Iowa State Capitol, just like we wouldn't want a statue to Stalin or Hitler or Mao Zedong. I mean, there's not a lot of precedent for this, but again, these are the consequences when we start to divorce, what we do, the moral foundation of our society, from biblical truth.
Yeah, and you bring up the tearing down the statue thing. It's really interesting how many statues were torn down in 2020, and I don't know. Maybe as a lawyer, I don't know if any of those people were prosecuted for defacing any statues of either George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, anything like that. That's an interesting thought I just had while you were talking about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's, you could make an argument that there was somehow similar precedent for that. The vast majority of those cases, there was no prosecution. People were simply released, even if they were charged, or they received a very small fine, like a $25 fine, for, vandalism, destruction of property, or things like that. And that's essentially the argument we were making in Iowa is, look, Michael never denied that he did this. And so that's what we wanted. We wanted something that would be equal under the law, for what he had done compared to the way they'd handled other cases. And even in Des Moines, there are many people who were involved in riots, BLM riots, tearing down statues or other things that weren't prosecuted at all.
Yeah, and I remember that. I don't remember who it was. I don't remember his name off the top of my head, but I remember seeing the response from this pastor who's also either a state rep or congressperson, whatever. And I think I trolled him pretty hard on Twitter because I was like, this is like, I'm a pastor. This is terrible rulership. Like, you're not executing your office. You have the authority and ability to do something about this wickedness, and you are not doing anything. I think, Davis, it might be helpful, though, even as I say that out loud, for some people who are like still a bit like, well, how can we say it's wickedness? Don't people have a right to, do whatever they want? How would you speak to somebody that is really like dogmatic, almost to a degree that our founders wouldn't recognize, in allowing this stuff? Like, why is it so important that we stand firm on this and don't give an inch, rather than just kind of let everyone willy-nilly put up statues and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that we need to think through. First of all, what I will say about this situation is Michael waited until almost the last day that the statue was up for someone to do something about it. Someone with the authority, whether it was the governor of Iowa, whether it was the state legislature, someone to do something. No one did, right? And so that's when he felt compelled to act. But as we look at these issues, look, these are hard issues to kind of figure out, because absolutely, your initial reaction can be, okay, what about freedom of religion? What about these things? But that really does buy into this idea of the myth of neutrality. And I would also say it's right in line with people who say, oh, we shouldn't legislate morality. We can't legislate morality. The problem is every single law, every single civil code, whatever it is, has a morality behind it. Whether we want to recognize it or not, it absolutely does. Everything does. So what we have to do, what we've done as Americans, is we have bought into a lie from the secular humanists that there is this neutral civil sphere where we should just play nicely with everyone and, not bring our religious faith into it. The problem with that is that's impossible. God created us all to worship. So in everything we do as men and women created in the image of God, we're either worshiping man or worshiping God. There's this idea of neutrality in anything we do is not in line with biblical truth. So that's part of just the bad theology we've accepted. That's in part our fault, in churches and other things, that we have a very watered down theology and perspective on this. We should be bringing all of Christ to all of life. So I think we have to sort of tear down those idols that we have, this idea we can peacefully coexist. Doesn't mean we have to be jerks about it. Doesn't mean we're talking about coercion. We're not talking about that. That's not what our founders thought. But again, the principles our founders used gave us the greatest religious freedom we've ever had in a nation in world history.
Yeah, and I think one of the concerns might be, because this is a very inspiring act. I've already said that. At the same time, you look at what other acts, if Christians are going to engage in this kind of stuff and civil disobedience lawfully, then what other, like it almost opens a door to permissibility, which I think would make some people quite nervous, to be frank. Like, where it's like, okay, I see in Texas when I go back home, a bunch of like Hindu statues and stuff. I'm like, where is there a line that either as Americans we shouldn't cross on these matters, or are there biblical reasons that we should permit these kind of things? I mean, as Christians, we believe Hindu is a demonic religion. And so one could reason to a point where, okay, well, we're gonna start doing this everywhere. Right. Weigh in on some of that, because I think a lot of people could get freaked out by that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that you have to look at in Michael's situation is the fact that this was officially endorsed, or at least officially tacitly supported by the state of Iowa. This wasn't on private property. This wasn't a mosque or a church building or anything like that. This wasn't at a private residence. This wasn't at a private home. This was at the state capitol, belonging to the people of Iowa. So I think that's a huge difference. And even in the Old Testament, when you see these idols being torn down, a lot of them were related to official government endorsement of these religious things. So I think that is a starting point for analysis. Michael would never, I am not, advocating that Christians or people go out and do these things. In this case, there was no other redress. There was no other recourse, because no one was going to act. The people that should have acted, the Christians, in Iowa with the authority to put a stop to this did not. And so, Michael felt compelled by the Holy Spirit once he saw it to do this. Again, knowing it was a crime, knowing there would be consequences, he counted those costs and he did this. That does not mean we need to go out and do these things, but there are times where we might be called to act in a similar, nonviolent, peaceful, way when it comes to responding to this. Again, we're not advocating for that. Michael would never advocate for that. But there are things about this case that are different, that don't happen very often, that are worth considering.
Okay, that's great. That's helpful. Then one last question, I think, on the legal front would be, one of the things I think I've mentioned on the podcast, if I haven't, this will be the first time, but I've tried to encourage other Christians wherever they are. I'm on the kind of the front lines of the secular left in Boulder. It's a lovely place, beautiful place that God has made. And thankfully, it's not like Portland yet. But, there's a lot of leftist ideology here. But it's also a very comfortable place. It's kind of like Palo Alto. And so it's kind of an enclave. So one of the things I keep warning other Christians about in more conservative parts of the country is, like, if you don't act now and you don't put your foot down now, they want this everywhere. They want it everywhere. If you don't either pass laws in your town or enact ordinances against certain things now, then they're just going to run you right over. And so talk to me about how, let's focus on this case specifically. Is there anything legally that they could have done to prevent the statue from ever being put up in the first place? What should they have done?
What they should have done is they should have looked at the purpose intent of the Satanic Temple and just legally, just not even bringing, Christian theology into it. They should have said, no, that's offensive. You don't need to do that in December. You don't need to do that in December to mirror a nativity scene. The answer is no. Now, part of what happens is the Satanic Temple does this just so they can sue states, so they can sue school districts and things like that. But they could have a policy that says, hey, we're going to, but you could certainly define this as offensive content. And so that would have been something they can do. But I think that's specifically what counties, states need to look at, is what is their policy? How is it written? And they have to be willing to draw a line and then be consistent. The other thing they could have done is said, we will allow, religious displays that are in keeping with the traditional values and historic values of the United States. This doesn't, you're done. And that's the standard we apply to everyone. Okay. Right. So there are ways to be creative and wise about doing this. We've just given it up. Right. And the other thing I will say that is my warning about this is here's the reality. The reality is that, Michael in the military, and I cannot emphasize how critical this is, has been labeled a domestic extremist. And in the report of investigation that the Navy generated, they were praising the Satanic Temple, praising them, and criticizing him. In part, they used 4 posts that Michael put on X that just reflected nothing controversial at all, nothing inappropriate at all, just reflected traditional biblical values. But the problem is, during the Biden administration, over the last 4 years, you have seen this incredible shift, and there was shifts before, but in particular, it's just ramped up, where now things that we believe as Christians, basic biblical truths about human sexuality, about marriage, about reproductive freedom, right? How do you like how they say that, right? Yeah. About being pro-life, are labeled as extremists. Literally, in Department of Defense instructions and Army policy and other policy letters, they are defining extremist groups as people who advocate against the rights of others. Now think about how they use that language. You appreciate this as a pastor, that advocate against the rights of the others, and then they'll use examples. Against the reproductive rights and freedoms of others, right. Against the marriage rights and freedoms of others, against the sexuality or gender rights of others. So all of a sudden, individuals in the military who engage in acts like Michael did, who are just tweeting about basic biblical Christian truths, are seen as advocating against those rights. I've even warned people these policies could be described in such a way where if I went to your church, brother, and I was on active duty in the military and I'm tithing to you, somebody could twist that policy and try to say I was supporting an extremist group because you preach biblical truth on marriage and human sexuality. That's the point that we're at with some of these things. So that's a real wake-up call. That should be a wake-up call to all of us, that we cannot sit back and just let that happen.
Yeah, and I've seen that stuff going around, whether the documents and everything. And that's what's been rattling around in my brain as a pastor, as I care for people, and I try to encourage them to be courageous, to be bold, to stand fast. I care about people, and that's why I'm trying to articulate biblical truth clearly, lovingly, and truthfully. I don't want that for my congregants, you know, and I want us to stand strong. I thoroughly believe, I'm thoroughly convinced that if Kamala were to be elected, this would only get worse. You know, these types of actions. I do want to get your take. I forgot to ask you at the beginning. We are recording this on Election Day. I'd love to get kind of your prediction. I think the right people on the right, people who are conservative, are very kind of like, you see polls, you see all this kind of stuff. So, Davis, what's your kind of read being up in Pennsylvania? What's your read on the election so that we can hold it against you whenever this podcast comes out if you're wrong? What do you think is going to happen?
You know, my prediction is if Trump wins, he's going to get 297 electoral votes. I think Pennsylvania is going to be absolutely critical. Everything I'm seeing, and again, it may just be my perspective, is there seems to be much more enthusiasm for Trump than there was in 2020. Closer to 2016, but even just different kind of momentum. It's not embarrassing. In 2020, everyone was embarrassed. People were embarrassed to put a Trump sign in their yard. People, we're not doing those things. And really in the last 2 months, there were no Trump signs. I mean, there were a couple neighbors I have had Trump signs up since 2015. But those had disappeared for the most part. They came back a couple of months ago. So something has changed that has gotten people to acknowledge it. And I will tell you, in Pennsylvania, the fact that Kamala Harris is not from here, the fact that Biden was, makes a huge difference in a state like Pennsylvania. They don't vote for, I know it's a Yankee state, but they don't vote for carpetbaggers. They don't vote for people who have just moved here recently. And Biden was a hometown boy. So they loved that about him. So I think Trump is going to win. I think he's going to win Pennsylvania. I think it's going to be very, very close. And if he does win, I think he's going to get 297.
That's great. Excellent. Michael, what about you?
I think about the same. I think Trump's going to win. I think he's got Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia. I think he's going to get Wisconsin, Arizona, Michigan, and Nevada are the two that are his weakest states. I still think that he's going to win them by a point or so, but fortunately, he could lose both of those two states, and he'd still win. So. I don't think I think he's going to make it close in states like Virginia and Minnesota and even New Mexico, but close just means like 2 to 5 points, where, I mean, Biden won by about 10 points in 2020. So it's going to be closer. And I think we're going to see a general, on average, I mean, it'll be different by state, about a 5 or so point swing to the right. So I think Trump wins the popular vote by just a little bit, not by much, by maybe less than a point. But anyways, that's my prediction. And we'll see when this comes out how wise or not I look.
That's great. Yeah, my prediction is a win. It's election day, so I'm very, very animated right now. I joked earlier on Twitter, you know, I was only 17 in 2004 when Bush was running for a second term. And 9/11 was, I mean, for everyone in America, it was a pretty like rattling experience. And me being in high school, I was like, dude, we got to go fight. I got to sign up. I didn't. But I was like a big Bush guy, you know, big like turn it to glass, that kind of stuff. And then I swung way hard the other way. And so, but I haven't been this excited about an election in a long time. And I think it's reflective of like what I see happening. I'm hoping there's going to be some nice surprises in terms of how many Americans turn out. Because like we said earlier, if Kamala gets into power, I mean, this type of stuff is going to be even harsher, more pervasive. And yeah, it's going to be really sad. So where does, I mean, Michael, being labeled, I mean, I guess legally you've been labeled a domestic extremist. Is that the right term for you?
I believe so. I don't think they said terrorist. I'm pretty sure it was domestic extremist. That's what the Navy decided at the conclusion of their investigations. And it's for basically the same charge as the felony hate crime that the Iowa prosecutor ended up dropping. So it's interesting to note that the Navy, that a Soros-backed leftist district attorney that they are being, in the end, less harsh on me than the United States military.
That's insane.
And that it's a result of what I believe of the influence of mainly civilians in this administration, but that, people in the military, we usually will, we see that we read the tea leaves, and like if not just so we follow orders, but higher ups understand that if they speak out against the COVID mandates, then they're going to get fired. They're going to lose their job. And for some people, that's a risk that they were willing to take.
Yeah.
But if people have a mind of, I want to keep moving up the ranks, I want to keep promoting, I want to get to a retirement, then that's when they read the tea leaves and they see, oh, well, look at all these, policies that the Biden administration and then Kamala administration is putting forward. I may not personally agree with them, but I ain't going to stick my neck out for them. And that's how things like this, and maybe if I, go after this Christian man for doing this, then I can then use that as a positive note for getting the next star as an admiral or general. And so that's where the who is in charge of this administration of the military, unfortunately, has an outsized effect on the culture of the military. And it used to not be that way. It used to be people would think of the military as generally a nonpartisan institution. I mean, that's
right.
That's one thing that our founders were so terrified about, from like Rome, of generals taking over and being too political. And the American military tradition has been pretty good in being apolitical for the most part. And that has deteriorated the past several years. And the higher ups in the military, unfortunately, are acting more as an extension of the political views of the administration. And what's so terrible is that these leftist views are just, they're persecuting Christians. They're destroying the combat effectiveness of our military. And for that, just for those reasons alone, besides any of the other good reasons for wanting a Trump versus Kamala presidency, like that alone should be a reason to vote, today, for, if you haven't already, for Trump, which I haven't. After this is done, I'm going and casting my vote. So I haven't done that yet, but I will.
That's great. Yeah, I think that's one of the things that, the military kind of terrifies me. I mean, in a good way, but also a bad way. Like it should be an intimidating force. But yeah, it's the more I think about it, I'm like, gosh, that if you have a whole group of people that have the right with these arms, and they've been kind of indoctrinated and that kind of thing, that's a terrifying reality to be faced with. Would you say the general, I had always thought the military was generally conservative, maybe not Republican by any means, but just generally like, we love America, we're going to fight, defend our freedoms, that kind of stuff. Would you say the general kind of temperament of the servicemen and I guess the Navy or anywhere else, are they generally conservative people, or has it been so radicalized that most people are just going to do whatever they say, and so that means we're going to enforce leftist indoctrination wherever it comes up?
I think you can see the evidence in, one, I do believe that for the most part, people are in the military remain mostly conservative and Christian. I don't think it's as much it's definitely been going down a bit, but it's still, I'd say, a majority. But that's one of the things about the military is I work just fine with people, and have always done so, work fine with people of other beliefs or people that aren't Christians, and then other people can work well with Christians or Republicans or Democrats. That doesn't, like, we kind of leave those distinctions at the lower levels. We leave those before we get on base. But whether people are going to follow the orders of higher, leftist orders, we saw that with COVID. We saw that so many people in leadership positions followed this illegal COVID mandate. And that really should be a wake-up call, that people, that's both a strength and a weakness of the military. Strength, people follow orders. The weakness is not questioning whether those orders are lawful orders or not having enough, whether it's, knowledge or fortitude. But when we don't know what to do, we often fall back on what we're familiar with, and what we're familiar with is following orders.
Right. Yeah.
And that's a big part of what happened, and why it's so critical that we get this leftist influence out of the leadership levels of this administration.
For sure. So Davis, kind of closing out here, rounding out, what are you going to be representing him in the Navy as well? Are you what do they call it? Military lawyer? I don't remember the legal term for that.
Right. Yeah. So I am a former JAG, and yes, I will be representing him in the Navy. I mean, that's a large part of what I do and have done since I left active duty, is represent military members in military boards and courts. So I will be representing him. This is a really important case. There's a couple things that are going to happen, and I know this episode will come out after the election, so we will know, and that may impact strategy. But the biggest thing is, we want to set really strong precedent with Michael's case. If God's will is for this to go all the way to a board, we want to set a strong precedent with his situation that, there are still officers in the Navy that will look at this case, that will do the right thing, and they won't be beholden to, this woke progressive definition of what is an extremist. So that's the hope. So we still need a lot of support for it. And, going forward, if we see a Kamala victory, the need for Stand With Warriors, everything we're doing is going to be more important than ever, because we're going to see another purge of conservative Christians from the military. If Trump wins, it's going to be an opportunity to make sure he's surrounded by good Christian people. He's made some promises on the campaign trail, and we're going to need to hold him to it to get good people in the right situation to make positive change for the future. And that's going to be huge. It's going to be very, very huge.
Okay, great. Yeah, you mentioned support. Is there somewhere people should go either to keep up or donate or anything like that?
Yeah, if you're able to and you want to donate to Michael's defense, and it all goes to Michael's defense specifically, there is a GoFundMe. So it's just Michael Cassidy on GoFundMe.
Give, send, go.
Oh, I'm sorry. Give, send, go. I always do that. I always do that. Give, send, go. Michael Cassidy, give, send, go. You can support him directly there. That goes 100% to his legal fees and to support his case. That's it. It doesn't go to anything else. If there are funds left over in that, then they're going to be donated to another nonprofit, potentially Stand With Warriors, but they will go to a nonprofit if there's anything left over that does this work. So absolutely, you can support him. And it has made a huge difference. I cannot emphasize enough the fact that without resources, we would not have been able to go toe-to-toe with an Iowa prosecutor with $350,000 of Soros PAC money behind her to take this down. We had to go all in. We needed congressional pressure. We needed media pressure. We needed the best legal team we could come up with to push back on this. And we would not have been successful without that. And the fact is, no individual American citizen anymore can stand up to that kind of lawfare without help. And that's what it took in Michael's case.
Okay, great. I'll put a link to that in the show notes for you listeners. Any kind of closing remarks before we kind of get off the air? I want to make sure I'll put that website in there. Michael, are you still on Twitter, or did you deactivate for legal reasons?
No, I'm still on Twitter or X. My
X
handle,
is it now?
Yeah. My handle is my name, Michael Cassidy. And the final thought that I've got is really that I still just want to emphasize I don't have regrets over what I did, and that I want Christians to take away that it's okay to be bold, to defend our faith, and that Christ told us, John 16:33, that we're going to have tribulation and trials in this world, but be of good cheer, because Jesus has overcome the world. And so it's not all just gumdrops and rainbows and sunshine, the good kind of rainbow.
Yeah, the good ones.
That in our Christian life, and that we need to be joyful in glorifying God and unafraid to do so. And that even 10, 11 months after it happened, and I've definitely had some trials and tribulations. I certainly I would prefer to not have tribulations, but that's not what God has ordained, and that I'm quite happy and I stand upright and with full confidence that whatever happens going forward, it's what God has rightfully ordained. And I just pray that my fellow Christians can have that similar peace and similar boldness in standing up for our beliefs.
That's excellent. Excellent word to close out. Guys, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks, Chase.
Absolutely. God bless you, brother.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Michael Cassidy about his experience, both as a courageous Christian man, but also in the legal system and in the military. Lots of fun threads to pull there, and I hope it was edifying for you and encouraging you. As I said at the top of the show, you can sign up on the Patreon, ask me any questions you got. I can send those over to Michael. If you want to ask Michael anything, feel free to hit me up that way. Also want to remind you about a great product that I like to use called Ion Layer. Ion Layer is an NAD Plus at-home infusion. In fact, I just got an email the other day from a local kind of health thing called Restore. They do like cryotherapy and other things, and I've used them in the past just to get some red light therapy in the winter or whatever, and they're offering NAD Plus kind of infusions, IV drips, but these things are thousands of dollars when you go get them in person. This Ion Layer NAD Plus infusion is a patch you put on, and it's super affordable compared to that. And by using the code FPT at ionlayer.com, use code FPT, you can get $100 off your first kit. It's like a 25% discount. So it's a great way to boost your NAD Plus levels. These are essential for your energy levels, your recovery after workout, all that good stuff. So head over to ionlayer.com, use code FPT to get $100 off your first kit. And they come with a 30-day, 100% money-back guarantee. So it's really a no-brainer, even if you just want to try it. Sign up today at the link in the show notes, and we'll see you next time.